time I said here, I have the English Standard Version. Now, most of you know I like to use the King James, which is the Bible I use most of the time. Sometimes I will read out of the NIV. And I just sat down here and thought, I want to see how the English Standard Version reads. But I want you to turn with me to 2 Kings in chapter 2. And I was actually reading this morning for my morning Bible reading. And again, that's another one of those things I will tell you is a habit. You develop faith habits. Just like you didn't really have to work at bad habits, they crept in. You work at making good habits. You make it a point. You know, sometimes you have to just discipline yourself like this. Mine is I must. This is not for study purposes, just to read for myself. I have Bible reading in the morning. And whether I read to myself or sometimes I sit and I'll read to somebody else, sometimes I'll be on the phone and I'll be reading the Bible to somebody over the phone, or they're reading it to me. That's the time to just read the Bible. You commit to that. So this morning I was reading, I've actually been reading I read through 1 Kings and into 2 Kings, and at the point, so I've got my old Bible open. My new Bible is open with no markings in it yet, and this English Standard Version. But the point I began to read, and something interesting came into my mind here. This is in chapter 2, when Elijah is going to be taken up. That's the way the chapter 2 opens. It came to pass when the Lord would take up Elijah into heaven by a whirlwind, that Elijah went with Elisha from Gilgal. And Elijah said unto Elisha, Tarry here, I pray thee, for the Lord hath sent me to Bethel. And Elisha said unto him, As the Lord liveth, and as thy soul liveth, I will not leave thee. So they went down to Bethel. And you know, we've got this each time, I will not leave thee, I will not leave thee. And this is just to kind of set the stage for something that it dawned on me. After Elijah is taken up, remember that Elisha asked for a double portion of Elijah's spirit. Could have asked for anything, but he asked for a double portion of his spirit. And remember what Elijah said, well, it's really not for me to say, but if you see me go up, then you know it shall be so. And it's a couple of things as I was reading this. I smiled and I said, you know, it's so funny because we have a tendency to read that or read these people, and they're even though we've been reading them and studying them, the lesson doesn't really sink in. Was what Elisha asked for out of God's will? The answer is no. He asked for a double portion of Elijah's spirit. And if you look at the spirit of Elijah, the spirit that was so to stand on God's word and not be moved, one quarter turn no matter what, except for the time when he ran and wanted to kill himself under a tree, except for that time. Just saying. But I love that he asks for that double portion. And I thought, this is exactly what Jesus says in the New Testament. He says it specifically and lays it out really plainly in John when he says, if you ask anything in my name, and that, people have taken that to, oh Lord, I really need this. We're talking about according to what is necessary or needful in the life of a servant of God. And don't just think Elisha, think about yourself. This is why, the abuse of the name it and claim it people and the abuse of going to God as the genie in the bottle, but the right use of asking for something and the attitude. Elijah said, it's not for me to say whether or not you'll receive this thing. In other words, he didn't say it like this, but this is God's decision. But ask. And the only thing he said is, and if you see me go up, then you'll know. You'll have your answer. But what's so remarkable about this, and just indulge me for a minute, what's so remarkable about this, Because I started in chapter 2 to lead you to the point where, obviously, Elijah is taken up, and Elisha saw Elijah being taken up. And then in verse 13, this is after Elijah is taken up, he took up also the mantle of Elijah that fell from him, went back, stood by the bank of Jordan. He took the mantle of Elijah that fell from him, smote the waters, and said, "Where is the Lord God of Elijah?" Think about that. Isn't that radical? He asked him for a double portion of his spirit. It's almost kind of a comedy in a way. And when he also had smitten the waters, they parted hither and thither, and Elisha went over. And when the sons of the prophets which were to view at Jericho saw him, they said, "The spirit of Elijah doth rest on Elisha." Now, that's not even my point. Let's just read on. There's a kind of an important point about this. God has a great sense of humor. And I pray you see what I saw when I was reading this morning. I thought, God could do anything. It says, then the spirit of Elijah, they said, "The spirit of Elijah doth rest on Elisha." And they came to meet him and bowed themselves to the ground before him. And they said unto him, "Behold now, there be with thy servants 50 strong men. Let them go, we pray thee, and seek thy master, lest peradventure the Spirit of the Lord hath taken him up, and cast him upon some mountain." Really? Talk about a disbelieving or an appeased bunch of people, or into some valley. And he said, "Ye shall not send." And when they urged him till he was ashamed, he said, "Send." Okay already, go. They sent therefore 50 men. They sought 3 days, but found him not. And when they came again to him, for they tarried at Jericho, he said unto them, "Did I not say unto you, go not?" Now, here's where I want you to get your attention a little bit here. And the men of the city said unto Elisha, "Behold, I pray thee, the situation of this city is pleasant, as my Lord seeth, but the water is not, and the ground barren." And he said, "Bring me a new cruse, and put salt therein." They brought it to him. And he went forth unto the spring of waters, cast the salt in there, and said, "Thus saith the Lord, I have healed these waters. There shall not be from thence any more death or barren land." So the waters, bear with me, the waters were healed unto this day, according to the saying of Elisha which he spake. Now let me ask you a question. Could not God, in all of his miracle-working power, just give the capacity for Elisha to speak and say, "Water be clean"? Why the salt? Here we go. Why the salt? Oh, there's a new one, because before we had Elijah and the voice of where to get the water. Why the salt? Did God need that to perform the healing of the waters? No. But that's what he used. Wait. You want to talk about political correctness here. This little 23, 24, 25, you cannot get a passage that would be more controversial today. He went up from thence unto Bethel, and as he was going, by the way, there came forth little children out of the city, and mocked him, and said unto him, "Go up, thou bald head. Go up, thou bald head. Go on, baldy, keep going." And he turned back, he looked on them, and he cursed them in the name of the Lord. Little children. Well, that's not becoming of a man of God. A man of God should have said, "Oh, silly children." He got mad because they were calling him baldy. He cursed them. There came forth 2 she-bears out of the wood, and tore 40 and 2 children of them. He went from thence to Mount Carmel, and from thence he returned to Samaria. I mean, that's about the craziest passage in the Bible, I think. I kind of like it, though. You know, you make fun of the prophet of God calls 2 bears. And they come and tear those little kids to pieces. Who's bald now? Sorry. No. That's not my point, by the way. That's just a gratuitous sidebar here. Now, I want you to notice something. When you begin to read the miracles that Elisha does, and this is the point. The first one there was the salt. When he cast the salt into the cruse, just some of the miracles you pay attention to and you see, wow, this is interesting. You've got, so I've numbered these. The first miracle was the passage through the Jordan. The second one was purifying the water. The third was the strange thing with the children, which is very weird. But the fourth one comes to, you'll read about the fourth one. The fourth one is his decree in verse 16, chapter 3 and verse 16, when he says to make this valley full of ditches, that there would be water. There's this double thing. There'll be water, but this will also act as a double play to bring the enemies into the valley, and they will smite the enemies that way as well. And I thought each one of these miracles are not miracles like the miracles we see in other places. These are miracles that God did. I want to call them miracles of faith, where the prophet, whether God was speaking through the prophet or the prophet declaring what God had said, but he says, for example, make this valley full of ditches. Well, why do that? Because God could provide water, and he could also provide a way for the enemies to fall. He could also just point his finger and smite them all. Make this valley full of ditches. And of course, that passage, I should go back and read that. It's kind of an entertaining passage. But it really, the point of all of what I was reading this morning, it had me sitting and just shaking my head and thinking, wait a minute though. God could do more miraculous type of miracles, and yet he didn't. All the miracles that were performed with Elisha, save perhaps the bringing the boy back to life, bringing the widow's son back to life, well, the boy that wasn't supposed to be, that came to be back to life. Except for that one, the rest of these are just, they seem like just rather radical statements of faith being acted upon versus something super spectacular happening. And the point there is saying God could have done anything, but he chose to do it this way. Now let's go back and let's read this third chapter, because I think it'll add to it for those people who may not be reading too much in 2 Kings. Now Jehoram the son of Ahab began to reign over Israel and Samaria the 18th year of Jehoshaphat, king of Judah, and reigned 12 years. I even love the detail of this, how many years, and I love all of that. And he wrought evil in the sight of the Lord, but not like his father and like his mother, for he put away the image of Baal that his father had made. Nevertheless, he cleaved unto the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, which made Israel to sin. He departed not therefrom. And Mesha king of Moab was a sheep master, and rendered unto the king of Israel 100,000 lambs, 100,000 rams, with the wool. It came to pass when Ahab was dead, that the king of Moab rebelled against the king of Israel. And King Jehoram went out of Samaria at the same time, numbered all Israel. And he went and sent to Jehoshaphat the king of Judah, saying, the king of Moab hath rebelled against me. Wilt thou go with me against Moab to battle? And he said, I will go up. I am as thou art, my people as thy people, and my horses as thy horses. And he said, which way shall we go up? And he answered, the way through the wilderness of Edom. So the king of Israel went, and the king of Judah, and the king of Edom, and they fetched compass, a 7 days' journey. And there was no water for the host and for the cattle that followed them. Now you say, here's the ditch part, which I think is just amazing. Why ditches? Okay. The king of Israel said, alas, that the Lord hath called these 3 kings together to deliver them into the hand of Moab. But Jehoshaphat said, is there not here a prophet of the Lord, that we may inquire of the Lord by him? And one of the kings of Israel's servants answered and said, here is Elisha, the son of Shaphat, which poured water in the hands of Elijah, on the hands of Elijah. Jehoshaphat said, the word of the Lord is with him. I love that they at least recognized that. So the king of Israel and Jehoshaphat and the king of Edom went down to him. And Elijah said unto the king of Israel, what have I to do with thee? Get thee to the prophets of thy father and the prophets of thy mother. What do you want with me now? Why are you coming to me? The king of Israel said unto him, nay, for the Lord hath called these 3 kings together to deliver them into the hand of Moab. And Elisha said, as the Lord of hosts liveth, before whom I stand, surely, were it not that I regard the presence of Jehoshaphat the king of Judah, I would not look toward thee, nor see thee. But now bring me a minstrel. And it came to pass, when the minstrel played, that the hand of the Lord came upon him. And he said, thus saith the Lord, make this valley full of ditches. I came to this man of God, and he says, dig ditches. You know, I mean, right there, I hate to tell you, right there, if I was one of those kings, I said, what type of craziness is this? We went to see a prophet of God. He says, one of these kings says, the Lord is with him. Dig ditches. You've got to be kidding me. We came to ask this guy this, dig ditches? For thus saith the Lord, you shall not see wind, neither shall you see rain, yet that valley shall be filled with water, that you may drink, both ye, your cattle, and your beasts. Well, that's another question. Where'd the water come from, right? That's a recurring theme here in this book. And this is but a light thing in the sight of the Lord. He will deliver the Moabites also into your hand. Now, I want you to see, what I'm trying to say is that God could have done anything to bring water and victory. And look at the method that he uses. Go back for a second, and I want you to take a second look at the men coming and saying, there's no water, and the water that's here is not drinkable. And he puts salt in a cruse, and the water is healed. Here, dig ditches, and those ditches will be filled with water. And there'll be an added bonus to this, but they'll be filled with water. And you shall smite every fenced city and every choice city, and shall fell every good tree, and stop all wells of water, and mar every good piece of the land with stones. And it came to pass in the morning, when the meat offering was offered, that behold, there came water by the way of Edom, and the country was filled with water. And when all the Moabites heard that the kings were come up to fight against them, they gathered all that were able to put on armor, and upward, and stood in the border. They rose up early in the morning, and the sun shone upon the water, and the Moabites saw the water on the other side as red as blood, looking down. And they said, this is blood. The kings are surely slain. This is a 2-for-1 miracle right here. God didn't waste any part of this. They have smitten one another. Now, therefore, Moab, to the spoil. Let's go get the booty down there. And when they came to the camp of Israel, the Israelites rose up and smote the Moabites. It was a good situation there, so that they fled from before them. But they went forward, smiting the Moabites, even in their country. And they beat down the cities, and on every good piece of land cast every man his stone, and filled it. And they stopped all the wells of water, and felled all the good trees. Only in Kir-Hareseth left they the stones thereof. Howbeit the slingers went about it, and smote it. My point is, even here, God could have always said, these are the enemies of these kings. and could have brought them down any other way. But the way to get water and the way to bring down these, there's 2 for 1. Dig ditches. And then these people looking down, they're looking down at what they see are the ditches filled, but they think it's blood coming down. And of course, they're overtaken by those people. But the miracles that occur are not miracles that if you were expecting a miracle, you would have expected God to just speak and all these people fall down, like the healing evangelist on TV when he waves his hand, everybody falls, right? You'd expect that. Now, go to the next scenario here. You have the woman in chapter 4. Now there cried a certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets unto Elisha, saying, Thy servant, my husband, is dead. Thou knowest that thy servant did fear the Lord, and the creditor is come to take him, my 2 sons, the 2 sons to be bondmen, her 2 sons. Elisha said unto her, What shall I do for thee? Tell me, what do you have inside your house? And she said, Thine handmaid hath not anything in the house save a pot of oil. Now, this is a familiar passage, but I want you to see the same thing. God could have done any number of things through the mouth of the prophet or even apart from the prophet. What do you have in the house? I have a pot of oil. Nothing else but a pot of oil. He said, Go, borrow thee vessels abroad of all thy neighbors, even empty vessels, borrow not a few. Get as many as you can. And when thou art come in, thou shalt shut the door upon thee and upon thy sons, and thou shalt pour out into all these vessels, and thou shalt set aside that which is full. So she went in from him, shut the door upon her and her sons, who brought the vessels to her, and she poured out. And it came to pass that when the vessels were full, that she said unto her son, Bring me yet another vessel. And he said, There isn't any more, that's it. And the oil stayed. She came and told the man of God, and he said, Go, sell the oil, pay thy debt, and live, thou and thy children, off of the rest. Now, I ask you a question. Wouldn't it have been easier for God to just go and provide, just like that? This is the 5th miracle in here, and it seems like there's such a great lesson for us, the ones who are constantly saying, will God do, and we have needs, and we claim such things as the Lord provides for us because He is our provider. But I want you to see that sometimes the methods that God uses to bring about what is needed is not the way that we would say, well, this is the way it'll happen. This is the way God ought to do it, forgive me. But look at the methods that He used. And while I was sitting and I was reading this, I was thinking to myself, now, this woman, her husband's dead, her house may be sold, her children might be sold, and he says, what do you have in your house? Well, I have nothing but some oil. Okay, go and get vessels from people, get as many as you can, and start filling them up and fill up all the vessels, and then you'll sell that. You'll pay off your debt and you'll live off the rest. Now, with our mindset, we get familiar with these passages and we fail to see something underneath it all, which is, again, God could have seen the need of this woman and said, I don't know, open your window and a bird will deliver a pot of gold to you. I don't know. But go and borrow vessels from your neighbors. And what she had in her household was that which remained, which was multiplied. So, what struck me with all of these, and I went through more than just what I'm sharing with you, but what struck me is that a lot of times when we come to a place of need, like these 3 kings, needing water and needing a victory, or like this woman, needing money, needing something to sustain us, we tend to think of how possibly the Lord might do it if we even deign to really come and wholeheartedly trust that He can, and sometimes fail to see that a lot of the ways that God did things even in this passage and throughout many of these especially with Elisha. It was things that were right there. Like, here are people eating, and in one of these, my favorite saying, there's death in the pot. That's in the latter part of the 4th chapter. How does he heal what's in the pot? He says, bring me the meal, and he cast it into the pot, and then the food was made edible. In other words, if you understand and you study Elijah, you see that a lot of times the way God did things wasn't with the big fanfare, like some people tell you, they'll tell you about stories about what they may have even embellished about what they think the Lord has done for them. And I'm not saying that the Lord hasn't. But many times God intervenes and meets our needs in the very, where the rubber meets the road, right where we're at. And doesn't make a fanfare about it, and doesn't even, in many ways, doesn't even make it look like it's a miracle. If you understand that point, it's quite profound. It says that as long as we're trusting God, and I believe that set in order with all of these miracles, there's examples of every type of need. Now, the Lord can sustain. Now, let me speak specifically for me in something that I've come to perfect peace about, which I think through this and some other studies and some good old-fashioned, what I call need time praying, is that if somebody or something belongs to God, you keep asking God, you see all of these people here put on display for you to understand one thing. When they turned and waited on God's word, God did come through. Now, it's not always instantaneous. Here we have an example of things we read, and it's within verses. Something happens within a few verses. But I really do believe that the beginning of connecting with God is standing on something He's already said or done. For the people who I constantly read your prayer requests and your letters telling me, you need money, you need a way to make a way because there is no way. Now, understand the fine line between there's people out there who have just run on empty and somehow are still making it, and other people who they'll just sit and they'll think the Lord will fix this problem. And the Lord will not fix the problem without you first standing on a promise of God saying, God said He will do this thing. Now, that's not an excuse for bad stewardship. That's not an excuse for laziness. We're talking about the people of God who say, I've done everything. We have a couple of people that are faithfully committed to the ministry, and yet they are homeless. Got side of me that wants to reach in and fix their problem for them. I'd like to intervene and I'd like to fix it. And I say to myself, as much as it pains me, I cannot. I've got to let them work it out. They have got to stand on what they have heard and known. God is not a liar. These passages I've just read tell me a lot about the way God interacts with us. He knows exactly. All of these people He saw, He knew. He provided the person of Elisha. And isn't it interesting? He asked for a double portion of Elijah's spirit to be on him. And yet I find that Elijah did things that were slightly more, we'll call them more God-looking miracles than Elisha's man-oriented miracles. And does more miracles consecutively than anywhere else in the Bible. But they all have the same thread to them. And that's what I connected with this morning while I was reading this, and I said, I'm going to read this to you tonight. I'm going to read this to remind some of you that God does not promise that, He's just going to come in right on time, and while your whole world's falling apart, or you have a need, or something's happening, that He's just going to come in like a bellhop, like you just press the button, He's there. But I do believe those who trust Him and those who are absolutely committed, there's no guarantee of how fast God will enter in. He doesn't wear a watch. He's an eternal person, eternal being in eternity, entering into time. So the only thing I can tell you is using the passages I've just read, it seems pretty clear to me. It should stir us back to that is the faith that God listens to, that gets his attention, that says God can fix this thing. I speak for me now and this church. I have not said, God, fix my personal problems. Because my personal problems seem rather small and insignificant compared to the problems of the church. And I don't really know where I extricate myself of this being personal, and I don't know where the detachment comes. I don't know where the line is, the demarcation is. I don't know. But I've asked God, and I will keep asking God, because I've said to you, this is his work. There's a lot of people who would like to talk about the church, and then they'll start talking about Dr. Scott, or they'll talk about Melissa Scott. But Dr. Scott, as much as I love my husband, Melissa Scott, who's talking to you right now, not third person, but this is me, will be passing. He is passed, I will pass. And what remains, the solid thing that remains, is the church, his people, and your connection with God. So I believe this is his work, and I believe you are his people, and I believe I am his vessel. And with all of that, when I say I believe that, not as a delusional belief, but as a statement of this is that, then God also knows our needs as a church. I'm speaking for me now. And he can enter in at any moment. Now, I told one of the staff people today, I said, I kind of think that God has let us go through a time of famine, just to see what's really here. The God I've served and the God that I know, he does that. Calls people out of their comfort zone. They think they're going to get up and they're going to walk into a cush and comfortable land, and they end up going into a land of famine or into a land of trouble. Go into the promised land. It's yours. But why would we think it's any different down here? So of course there's going to be times of famine. What have I told you about the times of famine? That's where the blessings come. Read every single thing that is, I just covered 2 or 3 of these, maybe even 4, the 4th or 5th miracle that Elisha did. But they all come in the semblance of a pattern of something dire. We'll call it analogous to a famine. That's where God enters in. I've yet to find in the book here someone who was really doing good and really on top of the game and got blessed there, although I'm sure that does happen periodically. But the blessings come in the valley. And I really believe that's where God sees. That's where God tries the faith. Isn't that a crazy thing? God tries your faith that you have. The great metallurgist, he sees what it's really made of. Is it lip service or is it for real? And I believe once he's done testing that, he honors the faith of that one. I was blessed by this passage this morning because I thought, that's exactly the way God does things. Needs are not these super incredible, fantastic, like some people would have you believe that this is what God does, but it's in our everyday life. People who need to pay the rent and put gas in their car, get a job, or find peace in their family again, or have their marriage salvaged, something that is in everyday life that God enters into to work his good. But I believe before he does any of that, I believe there is a time when God just kind of, forgive me, it's maybe even borderline blasphemous and is definitely anthropomorphized, but I believe God might just stand back for a little time and say, we're going to see what happens here. Which handles will be grabbed first, the ones of the flesh or the ones of faith? Now, I'm telling you this because the blessing for me is I said, you know what? I said this yesterday. I have to now let some of you figure out This is a battle for the church. This is not Melissa Scott's battle. This is a battle for the church. Some of you who, you like to revel in past battles of the church, but those were fighting outside forces that were visible. This is the greatest battle you'll ever face, which is the invisible. The forces that rule, the prince of the power of the air, the power of this world, prince of this world, in the battle for this church. I speak for me. I know the Lord is able to enter in and not only turn this church around, but turn some of you who are just sitting and listening from just listening to a heart that says, I'm here. I am surrendering myself. You're not surrendering to me. You're not doing any service to me. You're surrendering yourself to God. Now, God will use every opportunity as long as our eyes are open and we're looking. We are seeing every faith opportunity that comes. God honors and takes each and every one of those steps that we make, and He meets us more than halfway. So I believe the Lord will turn this church around. He will turn hearts around. I'm still waiting and believing and claiming that there are people that, as I said, I know it's cruel to say, but some haven't. They've had great Bible teaching, but they haven't had the reality of Christ in their lives, because that reality of Christ, the resurrected one, the one on whom we talk about not just on Easter Sunday, but most of the year, a living, risen presence in our lives changes people. And not just now, let me step away from me and the church, and let's talk about you. And those of you who've just been struggling and you've been saying, boy, it's been tough. How many can say, it's been a tough 10 years? Yeah, it's almost all of you. It's been tough. Now, first good thing you know is that you were warned. Cheer up, Satan, it's going to get worse, right? You were warned. But I believe with each step that we make when we grow in faith, it's almost as though God knows. He won't tempt us beyond what we're able. He knows, let's put a little bit more pressure here. Or maybe, at times, maybe we're a little bit, strangely enough, we're a little bit more blessed in our famine. Maybe that's also equally a way of seeing how quickly we will stop clinging and cleaving to the promises of God once this problem is solved. I'm telling you, we're in a wonderful position right now. It doesn't seem like it on paper, but we're in a wonderful position. Anytime that you have a faith opportunity, count yourself blessed. And then worry when God solves the problem, because you may have nothing to faith about. You may have nothing that you have to reach for. See, that's some of the peripheral people who used to be here. That's part of their problem, is they were living through listening to Dr. Scott talk about the battles. Well, listen, I fought some pretty fierce ones over the last 10 years and didn't burden you, because I already knew reading some of your messages how burdened you were. You didn't need extra loads. You have your own. And some of these that just thought, well, there's nothing for me to faith about. Well, listen, isn't that when the devil does his best work? And isn't that when you say you have problem solved? Worry, friends. When the problem is solved, get worried. That's not saying I love problems or torture or tribulation, but worry. Because the life of this faith life is going from one, if you want to call it from one crisis to another, but it's from faith to faith. It is reaching every single day for something that I do not yet possess, I do not yet have. And I'm not speaking, in my case, about the tangible. But for some of you, it may be tangible. You're reaching for things that are not yet. Please remember the lesson of Elisha. It's much easier to talk about Elijah than it is Elisha. But when I talk about Elisha, I think these are the things in everyday life. What do you have in your house? We'll have a little bit of oil. Now listen, anybody else say that? If this wasn't chronicled here, you'd say, well, that's crazy. Got a little bit of oil and a little bucket tucked away there in the corner. What on earth is that going to do for this woman? Her kids are going to be sold. Preacher, are you insane? That's about the dumbest thing I ever heard anybody say. But this woman acted on it. Go get the containers. Just go get the containers. That was her act of faith. Go get the containers. They started to fill them. Sounds silly, doesn't it? Because we complicate things. It has to be something more than that God will look at. Go get the containers. Dr. Scott was right. When people are in a crisis financially, you better start giving. You give your way out of the crisis. You're in a crisis of your health. You're in a crisis of whatever situation. You begin to act in faith. It's easy. The easiest one is to talk about giving because there's a direct application. But you start faithing your way out of where you are. And like this woman, getting the containers. Okay, let's get the containers. Now, this is the way my brain works. Boy, this is a nutty thing. But he said, go get the containers and we'll fill them up and then we'll sell what comes out of it. I know there's just a little bit in there, so I don't know how much is going to come out. That's what I'd be doing. Go get the containers and start filling. Now, her problem is she probably didn't get enough containers. But you get the point. This is still a faith ministry. This will always be a faith ministry. I really believe this may fly in the face of what some people think, but I really believe if you had the internal knowledge of some of the financial crises we've been through over 40 years, you'd say, we're just like this woman. Go get the containers. Dr. Scott, I think about this, the many ups and downs over the years, the great things he wanted to undertake and the great losses, and some of them were great gains. We had some great losses over the years. Oh, the enemy made sure to make that a point of contention, and I'm sure that he probably went to his grave, because I know how much he grieved while I was with him over some of the things that happened over the years. But I can tell you this, there was never a person in my years of living who, if he had heard, go get the containers, he would have gone and get he probably would have gone, hey, we got buckets. We got big buckets. Come on, God, fill the big buckets. But it takes acting on God's word. So I'm trusting God to do exactly what he said. And I'm praying that faith will come again afresh for some of you who have fallen into the grip of more fear than faith, or you've fallen under the shadows of, well, God hasn't done anything and he sure hasn't been blessing me. Well, let's ask the questions in reverse. Did you get up this morning and have breath in your lungs? I think so, at least for the people sitting in front of me. And you went through your day and faced your day, no matter what you faced today. And some of you had an easy day, and some of you had probably the worst day of your life. But you're listening to me right now. And you can say, well, but God wasn't in it because I had to go through all this stuff today. Well, no, God was right there with you. You just think he wasn't. As you go backwards, you realize you're still very blessed. Because you're sitting here tonight, or wherever you are listening, hearing me tell you, this is the reality of the life of faith. It's not how some people portray it and depict it as some glamorous thing where God just, is like a game show host, constantly offering you new gifts on a little pedestal with a pretty man or a woman pointing at it. You've got to go get the containers sometimes. In fact, I'd say most of the time, let's talk about the container now. Let's transition to the promises of God. And you reach in, just like the container, you reach in and you go get it and you take it to yourself and you're ready. You're standing ready for God to do. Now, well, that's today. And then tomorrow, God doesn't come through again. So I get a little tired, and then I start lamenting that God's not doing anything, and here I go back on my tirade about how I'm not seeing what God is doing, and God can't be really blessing this because God's not doing what he said he would do. Then I realize, well, God didn't promise that he'd do it in a day. And he didn't promise the time. He didn't say, I'll do it in a set time. So I got to get my faith muscles up back again each day, brand new faith for each day. And eventually, at some point, God's going to look down and honor that faith. Now, some of you who said you had a tough 10 years, but you're still listening, you're still here, somehow, in the impossibleness of life, through losing a job, through losing a spouse, through losing your house, through losing almost everything, maybe even close to your mind, you're still here, which means God is still doing something and still wants you. And well, when the reality check comes back, here comes the attitude. Wow, God, I'm really sorry I stopped trusting you. I am such a bleep hole for not keeping my hand to the plow and waiting for you to do, because I know you're a faithful God and you're a merciful God. And you've brought me this far. And whatever the lesson is in this stretch of famine, I receive it. It's hard for me because I don't understand it, but I don't have to. And I'm going to say it like Job. Should I just receive all the good and not the bad? There's a purpose in this, and I'm going to embrace this purpose, and I'm going to wait for you to show me what it is. But I'm going to keep claiming your word. And you wait. I told one of the staff people today, I'm believing that this is our journey through the famine. For God to sift and to see, because I really do believe he's building an army of people here. And maybe we're like Gideon. Maybe there's just I've been lamenting, let's build, but maybe there's still a few too many who are here thinking they're just going to freeload and free ride and they can ride on my back and on my faith. No. That's not the way it works. You come in like the whole battle depends on you. Come in here knowing this is my need. It's personal for you. I don't know what yours is. This is my promise. I'm standing on it. And I'm going to wait and see God move in and do what only he can do. And guess what? I'm going to have ups and downs in my faith over this thing, but I'm going to stay steadfast. I'm going to stay connected. I'm going to keep faithing. I'm going to keep doing that for this church. I've told you what to do. On every level. I'm not saying I've given you all the answers. I've told you what to do. You hold on by faith when you cannot see. You have no way of knowing how God is going to work this out. And I pray, the only time I've told you where I'll say something as a personal testimony is, I am the poster child, for I have no idea of how this is going to work out or how this is even going to work. But God, I know you got a plan. So I'm just going to trust you. I'm going to wait and see. Because I know when you get done, God, it's going to be great. The process of waiting is just hard. I want to use another word. But I'll keep trusting you. That habit eventually develops into a lifestyle. And that lifestyle develops into a close relationship with God. Just like you have with your spouse or your mother or your child, at some point you say, that's the way they are. Well, this is the way God is. And you can know God from his word, how he's revealed himself. When he sees the need, and he sees, just like the best one is the woman with her containers, when he sees that preparedness, ready to act on the word and take it right to the edge of this is what God said to do, then God enters in. So I'm doing that for me and for this church because I know God has great things for us. That's not a pep talk, that's a reality. God has great things for us to do. God gave you a great pastor and Dr. Scott, great character, charismatic, loving. He was absolutely the general pattern of the church for this day and age. But he put me in his life for both of us to know what love, true love really is, love of a husband and wife, for him before he died, and for me for a last trip in my lifetime, to know what real love and a real man of God is. And to have that connection with him in his work but also to have the connection with God, to understand God loves me a lot. He loved Dr. Scott. He loves me a lot. He loves you. And He's got great things planned. Jeremiah 29 says, plans of peace, plans of prosperity. That doesn't say plans with no bumps in the road, but He's got good things in store. We have to stay steadfast, claiming the promises and staying steadfast in the faith. And that, my friends, is what God is going to honor. So I suggest you do what your pastor is doing right now, which is stay steadfast in the faith, claim a promise and say, this is what God said. Now I'm going to stand and see God move in and act on His word because it's His. He's going to make it come to pass. Get on the telephone.
Come into this house, magnify the Lord, lift up holy hands, our hearts in one accord. Worship and bow down before Him, exalt His name today. Come into this house,